The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when Helena got home, but she didn't open it right away. She set down her keys, poured herself a glass of water, stood at the window and watched the snow coming down over the rooftops of their neighborhood in Oakville. The kind of slow, deliberate snow that doesn't hurry for anyone. Then she picked up the envelope and read what was inside. It was a receipt, a hotel receipt, forwarded from their joint credit card statement to her work email. She'd set up the alert 2 years ago and completely forgotten about it until this moment. The Hazel House Hotel, downtown Toronto. One night, 2 weeks ago, on the Thursday, she'd stayed late at the clinic for a staff meeting and come home to find her husband, Marcus Webb, already asleep. Or pretending to be. Helena Carmichael set the envelope down on the counter. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She made herself finish the glass of water, and then she sat at the kitchen table in her coat. She hadn't even taken it off yet, and thought about the kind of woman she wanted to be in the next hour. Because the next hour would matter. Every hour after this one was going to be built on top of what she decided in the next 60 minutes. She decided to know everything before she said a single word. Helena was 41 years old. She was a physiotherapist with her own practice in Burlington, a mother of twin boys who were 12, and deeply uninterested in anything that didn't involve hockey or their phones. And she had been married to Marcus Webb for 14 years. He was a structural engineer at a firm in Mississauga, quiet in the way that used to feel steady. And now sometimes felt like distance. And he was the kind of man who remembered their anniversary without being reminded, and forgot to call when he was going to be late for dinner. She had loved him in the particular way you love someone you've built an entire life with, the way that's inseparable from the life itself. The mortgage, the boys, the Saturday morning routine at the farmer's market on Lakeshore, the arguments about whether to redo the bathroom this year or next. She had not suspected him. That was the part she kept returning to in the days that followed. She had not suspected him, and she considered herself a perceptive person. She noticed things. It was part of what made her good at her job, reading how someone held their body, what they protected without realizing it, where the tension lived. She noticed those things in strangers every single day. She had not noticed them in her husband. She started paying attention differently after the hotel receipt. It took her 4 days to find the Instagram account. It wasn't hidden, which she supposed was the point. It was public. The account belonged to a woman named Darcy Hale, and Darcy Hale was 29 years old, and a lifestyle content creator who lived in a glass-walled condo in Liberty Village, and posted photographs of herself with the careful, aestheticized confidence of someone who had decided early that her life was a brand. Beautiful photographs. Tasteful ones, mostly. Darcy in coffee shops. Darcy at farmers markets, not unlike Helena's own. Darcy in hotel lobbies that cost more per night than Helena's first month's rent. And then, 3 weeks ago, before the hotel receipt, before any of this, Darcy had posted a photograph from what was captioned a spontaneous midweek escape. She was standing at a window, city lights behind her, wearing a silk robe the color of pale champagne. The room was visible in the background. The bed was unmade. The post had 4,000 likes. Helena recognized the room. She had never stayed there herself, but she recognized the headboard. A dark curved wood, distinctive. A detail Marx had mentioned when he described a work dinner he'd attended at the Hazel House 2 years ago. She had filed the image away without knowing she was filing it. That was how memory worked sometimes. You collected evidence without knowing you'd need it. She sat with her laptop in the boys' empty room. They were at hockey practice, and read the comments on Darcy's post. They were the usual kind. Lovely. Goals. What hotel is this? Where is this robe from? And then, buried in the thread, one that had 9 likes. Aren't you the girl from that PR launch? You were there with the engineer guy? Darcy had liked the comment but not replied. Helena closed the laptop. She sat in the dark of the boys' room for a long time, looking at the glow-in-the-dark stars they'd stuck to the ceiling when they were 6, and that none of them had ever taken down. Because some things you just leave. She didn't go to pieces. She wanted to, in the way you sometimes want the easier thing. It would have been simpler to fall apart. To call her sister Faye in Vancouver and cry on the phone for 2 hours. To confront Marcus the moment he walked through the door. The falling apart would have felt like doing something. But Helena had learned, over years of working with people who were trying to recover from injury, that the impulse to do something and the wisdom to do the right thing were not always the same impulse, and that the difference mattered. She made an appointment with a family lawyer named Catherine Park, whom a colleague had used during a divorce the previous year. She did this on a Wednesday morning, between two client appointments, sitting in her car in the clinic parking lot with the heat running. Catherine Park was precise and calm, and did not offer unnecessary reassurance. She told Helena what she needed to know, and what she needed to document, and what her options were likely to look like if things proceeded in the direction that Helena was quietly beginning to suspect they would. Helena left the meeting feeling something she hadn't expected to feel. Prepared. She did not change her behavior at home. She cooked dinner. She helped the boys with their homework. Owen with his math. Theo with a history project on the St. Lawrence Seaway that he'd left to the last minute. She went to bed at the same time as Marcus, lay in the dark beside him, and listened to him breathe until he fell asleep, which took less than 6 minutes, because Marcus had always slept without difficulty, a quality she had once envied and now found she resented. She thought about Darcy Hale's Instagram account. She thought about the 4,000 likes. She thought about the comments. Goals. Lovely. What hotel is this? She thought about what it meant to post a photograph like that, to choose to make it public, to decide that what you were doing was something worth showing off. She had a plan, but it wasn't ready yet. Plans needed the right moment, and the right moment needed patience, and patience, real patience, not just waiting, was something Helena Carmichael had spent 41 years learning how to practice. The moment came from Darcy Hale herself, as Helena had suspected it might. Darcy was the kind of person who could not resist the performance of her own life. Every coffee, every gallery opening, every quiet night in was material. She posted 4 to 6 times a week. Helena had been watching the account for 2 weeks by this point, methodically, the way she would track a patient's recovery. Looking for pattern, looking for information, looking for the thing that would tell her what she needed to know. On a Tuesday in February, Darcy posted a photograph from inside an apartment Helena did not recognize. A kitchen, bright and modern, with pendant lights Helena had seen before. In the renovation magazine she and Marcus had bookmarked last spring, because they'd talked about updating their kitchen, because they had been the kind of people who planned ahead together. In the corner of the photograph, barely visible, was a gray wool coat hanging by the door. It was Marcus's coat. Helena had given it to him for Christmas 3 years ago. She knew the shape of it the way you know the shape of something you've handed to someone you love, folded and wrapped and set under a tree. The caption read, "Home is where they make you feel it." The post had 2,000 likes by morning, and Darcy Hale, either reckless or deliberately provocative, Helena had decided it didn't matter which, because the effect was identical, had tagged her location. A building on King Street West in Toronto. Helena looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at the coat. Then she read the caption again. Home is where they make you feel it. She thought about her boys asleep down the hall. She thought about 14 years. She thought about all the weight and texture of a life built with another person. All the invisible labor of it. All the mornings and arguments and reconciliations and small private jokes that accumulate into something that belongs only to the two of you, or that you believed belonged only to the two of you. Then she opened a new browser tab and began to research digital advertising options in Toronto. She found what she was looking for in less than an hour. There was a company that managed digital billboard space across the city, transit shelters, building-mounted LED displays, digital panels at high-traffic intersections. Their website had a self-serve option for short-term bookings. Helena had used it before, professionally, when she'd advertised the clinic's new location 2 years ago. She knew how it worked. She knew what was possible. She found the display unit closest to the building on King Street West that Darcy had tagged in her photograph. It was a large-format digital panel, mounted on the building directly across the intersection, facing the entrance. Was currently running a rotation of 5 advertisers. The next available slot opened in 6 days. Helena booked it for 7 days. She designed the creative herself at her kitchen table, after the boys had gone to bed, with a glass of wine she barely touched. She kept it simple. Simple was always stronger. The background was white. The font was the same clean, modern sans serif that Darcy used for her Instagram story text. And the copy, 4 words, centered bold. He has a wife. Underneath, smaller but still readable from the street, 14 years. 2 boys, ask him. She sat back and looked at what she'd made. It looked like a real ad. It looked like something a person with money and purpose had paid to put there, which was exactly what it was. She uploaded it, selected her dates, entered her payment information, and submitted. The confirmation email arrived 4 minutes later. She closed the laptop and went to check on the boys. Owen had kicked his blanket off. She pulled it back over him. Theo was asleep with his phone still in his hand. She set it on the nightstand. She stood in the doorway between their rooms for a moment. 2 beds, 2 boys, 2 small human beings who had no idea that the ground beneath their family was shifting. She told herself she was doing this with her eyes open. She was not doing it in anger, though anger was present, sitting underneath everything else like the foundation of a house. She was doing it because Darcy Hale had made a public choice, and public choices had public consequences, and Helena Carmichael was not willing to be the only person in this story who was invisible. The display went live on a Monday morning. Helena was at the clinic when the first text came in. It was from her friend Joanna, who worked at a design firm in the financial district and commuted through that part of King Street every morning. "Helena, is that you? Is that yours?" Then a photograph, taken through a car window, slightly blurred by the motion of traffic. The billboard, bright and white against the gray February morning, the text perfectly legible from the street. "He has a wife. 14 years, 2 boys. Ask him." Helena typed back, "Yes." There was a pause of about 30 seconds. Then Joanna replied, "Good." By noon, her sister Faye had called from Vancouver. Someone Faye knew had seen it posted to a local Toronto community Facebook group. By 3 o'clock, the photograph was circulating in a way that photographs circulate when they touch something true. Not viral, not trending, but persistent, passed between women in particular, in texts and DMs and group chats, with short attached messages that were variations on the same thing. "Have you seen this?" Helena saw the effect on Darcy Hale's Instagram account that evening. 3 days earlier, Darcy had been posting normally, stories, a reel, a photograph of her morning coffee. Since Monday, there had been nothing. The comments on her recent posts had changed. Not dramatically, not in a piling-on way, but there were questions. Who is he? And then people connecting the threads themselves. The way people on the internet are very skilled at connecting threads and finding the answers before anyone official had supplied them. Marcus called Helena at 7:30 Monday evening. She was helping Owen with his hockey gear, pulling tape off shin pads, the kind of domestic specificity that the world outside had no idea was happening at the same moment as everything else. She let it go to voicemail. He called again at 8. She was doing dishes. She let that one go too. He came home at 9. She was in the living room with a book she hadn't been reading. He stood in the doorway. He looked like a man who had spent the day trying to manage something that had stopped being manageable. His face was doing the thing it did when he was trying to find words, that particular stillness of someone rearranging their thoughts before they committed to speaking. "Helena," he said. "Boys are asleep," she said. "Keep your voice down." He came into the room. He sat across from her. He did not sit beside her, which she noticed and thought probably said something true. "People are going to think," he started. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was very quiet and very level. "I know about the hotel. I know about the apartment on King Street. I know about the coat." He went completely still. "I have met with a lawyer," she said. "I have copies of everything. And I put up a billboard because your girlfriend decided that my marriage was something she could post about publicly, and I decided to agree with her." He opened his mouth. "I'm not interested in having this conversation tonight," she said. "I want you to stay in the guest room. We will talk properly when I'm ready, and I will let you know when that is." He didn't argue. She thought, not for the first time, that she had underestimated how well she knew him. She had known, somewhere, that he would not argue. She had known the shape of him, even the parts she hadn't been willing to look at directly. He went down the hall. She heard the guest room door close. She sat with her book in her lap, not reading. Outside, the snow had started again. The story, because it had become a story by then, the kind that moves through a city the way cold moves through old walls, found its way to a journalist named Patrick Ossie at a Toronto lifestyle publication. who wrote a piece that was careful enough to omit names, but specific enough in its details, that anyone who knew any of the people involved could connect the pieces. The piece was about the billboard itself, framed as a question about what women chose to do with public space, with visibility, with the tools that the same attention economy that had enabled the affair had also made available to the wronged party. Helena didn't speak to Patrick Ossie. She had been asked through an intermediary and she had declined. She was not interested in being a story. She was not interested in being a symbol. She had done what she did for her own reasons, and her own reasons did not require an audience. But she read the piece. She read it twice, actually, sitting in her car in the parking lot of the boys' school one afternoon, waiting for the end of the school day. It was thoughtful. It was respectful. It described the billboard as precise. That was the word that stayed with her. Precise. It was the right word. She had wanted it to be precise. She had not wanted it to be cruel, which was a distinction she found herself caring about more than she'd expected to. Darcy Hale's Instagram following had dropped by 8,000 in a week. Several brand partnerships had gone quiet. Helena had not had anything to do with those consequences and had not intended them specifically, but she did not feel guilty about them. What Darcy Hale had chosen to make public had consequences. That was simply true, and Helena had no more responsibility for it than a mirror has responsibility for the reflection it shows. She and Marcus talked when she was ready. It was a Saturday morning, the boys at a hockey tournament in Hamilton. The house very quiet around them. She had made coffee. The ordinary act of it, the grinding, the measuring, the waiting, had felt both absurd and necessary. Marcus sat at the kitchen table. He looked tired. He had looked tired all week, the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy in a direction they eventually had to stop walking. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, in different ways, the way people do when they're genuinely trying to mean it. He said Darcy Hale had meant nothing, and then he stopped himself. Because Helena had given him one particular look, and he understood that she meant nothing was not a comforting sentence. It was an indicting one. That it answered the question of what kind of man made a choice like this for something that meant nothing. Helena listened. She let him finish. Then she said, "I need you to understand that the billboard wasn't about punishing you, or punishing her. It was about being visible. She made a choice to post that photograph in our home, with your coat in the frame and caption it the way she did. She chose to be public. I chose to be public. That's all that happened." Marcus looked at his coffee. "The boys," he said. "If they find out, they will find out," Helena said, "because they live in the world, and the world is not a controlled environment. And when they do, we'll talk to them together, and we'll tell them the truth in a way that's appropriate for them, and we will both be there for that conversation. That's what I need from you right now, not explanations." "That," he nodded. "The rest," she said, "we figure out. I don't know yet what that looks like. I'm not ready to know. But the boys will have their parents available to them, consistently, whatever else happens. That's the commitment I need." She hadn't cried through any of it. She thought about that afterward, not with pride, but with curiosity. She'd wondered if the lack of tears meant she'd already grieved something before she'd known there was anything to grieve, or whether she was still in the part of it that came before grief. She wasn't sure. She'd learned that you didn't always know what you were in the middle of until you were on the other side of it. It was Faye who told her, 3 weeks later, that the billboard had been photographed a total of 47 times before it came down, and that the images were still circulating in various corners of the internet with small, varied captions. Helena was visiting Faye in Vancouver for the week, something she'd been putting off for 2 years, and had finally just booked on a Tuesday evening without thinking about it too much. The boys were with Marcus. It was the first time she'd been away without her family in 4 years, and on the first evening, she walked along the seawall at dusk with the mountains across the water, turning the kind of pink that makes you feel briefly and specifically grateful to be alive. And she thought about the question her colleague Rebecca had asked her the week before, "Are you okay?" She had said yes because it was true, and also because the full answer was longer than the question warranted. She was okay. She was also sad and tired and angry in a way that came and went, and she was quietly, surprisingly proud of herself in a way she hadn't earned from anyone else and hadn't needed to. She had handled something hard with precision and intention. She had not fallen apart. She had not been invisible. She had not let someone else write the story of what had happened to her without her participation. She and Marcus were still in the house together, still navigating the question of what came next, still having the conversations that were harder than the conversation they'd had in the kitchen. On the Saturday morning, the ones that didn't have clear conclusions. She didn't know yet whether they would stay married. She thought she could see both futures from where she was standing, and she wasn't ready to choose one of them, and she had given herself permission not to be ready yet. Catherine Park had told her she could take the time she needed, legally speaking. Faye had told her she could take the time she needed, personally speaking. Helena had found she was better at giving herself that permission than she would have expected. Owen had asked her, one evening, while they were doing dishes. He'd started helping with dishes, which was something she registered and held on to, whether things were different now. He was 12. He was perceptive in the way that 12-year-olds can be when they've been paying attention. She had thought for a moment about the precise thing to say. Then she had said, "Some things are different. Dad and I are working through something that's hard. But the part that doesn't change is both of us being here, okay? That part stays." He'd nodded and handed her a pot to dry. She had dried the pot and thought about 14 years, and a hotel receipt in an envelope on a counter, and the snow coming down over Oakville in the particular unhurried way it had that November evening when she'd stood at the window in her coat and decided to know everything before she said a single word. She had known everything now, and she was still here, still herself, still the woman she'd decided to be in that first hour, not smaller for what had happened, not diminished, not erased. The billboard had come down on a Tuesday. The photographs remained. What a person did with their visibility was always, in the end, a choice. Darcy Hale had made hers, Helena Carmichael had made hers, and Helena's was still up, somewhere, in the way that precise things tend to stay.